On July 10, 2025, the Trump administration shocked the world with sweeping new tariffs, sending immediate ripples through financial markets and boardrooms across the globe. The announcement came without warning, catching investors, businesses, and even foreign governments off guard. Among the most dramatic measures was a 50% duty on all goods imported from Brazil, a move that directly linked trade policy to ongoing political disputes between the two nations. This unprecedented step signaled a willingness to use economic tools as weapons in international disagreements, raising the stakes for global commerce. The United States made it clear that it would now wield its economic power as a form of political leverage, upending decades of established trade norms and diplomatic protocols. This aggressive approach left allies and rivals alike scrambling to reassess their own strategies. Tariffs on copper were added to existing duties on steel and aluminum, with even more measures set to take effect on August 1st. The news sent shockwaves through global commodity markets, sparking anxiety among traders and manufacturers who rely on stable prices and predictable supply chains. In total, over a dozen countries received formal warnings of impending tariffs, each facing the threat of sudden economic disruption. Governments around the world convened emergency meetings to assess the potential impact on their economies and industries. Even the powerful BRICS bloc was not immune, as the US threatened a potential 10% levy on their exports. This cast a shadow of uncertainty over international commerce, with business leaders and policymakers expressing deep concern about the future of global trade. Prices for essential commodities like coffee and copper spiked almost overnight, reflecting fears of shortages and higher costs. Producers and exporters scrambled to find new buyers, while importers worried about passing rising costs onto consumers. The sudden changes rattled already fragile supply chains, leading to delays at ports and warehouses. American consumers, already wary of inflation, now faced the prospect of even higher prices for everyday goods, fueling anxiety and uncertainty. This aggressive new strategy marked a sharp break from the cooperative, rules-based system that had fueled decades of global prosperity. Nations were now forced to adapt quickly to a volatile and unpredictable new reality, where old agreements could be upended overnight. As shockwaves spread across continents, every country was compelled to reconsider its economic alliances and trade strategies, bracing for a profound and potentially lasting shift in the landscape of global trade. In the wake of Trump's abrupt exit from trade talks, Canada responded with calm, emphasizing dialogue over retaliation. Ottawa's leaders stressed the importance of open communication and a return to negotiations, aiming to de-escalate tensions. Their strategy projected stability, contrasting sharply with Washington's unpredictability. Canadian officials reassured businesses and citizens, focusing on long-term stability rather than short-term confrontation. This approach built domestic and international support for a rules-based trading relationship. By refusing to mirror US anger, Canada positioned itself as a mature, reliable partner. Their quiet resolve became a model of strength, showing that patience and diplomacy can be powerful tools in turbulent times. The US tariffs sent shockwaves through the global economy, shaking the very foundations of international trade and finance. Stock markets around the world tumbled as investors scrambled to make sense of the new reality, and the uncertainty rippled through every major financial center. Cargo ships sat idle at ports, and shipping containers piled up, signaling a sudden halt in the flow of goods that had once moved seamlessly across borders. The event was described by Canada's central bank governor as a once-in-a-century disruption, highlighting just how rare and severe the situation had become. Central banks everywhere were forced to reassess their policies, as the rules of global commerce seemed to change overnight. Business confidence and consumer spending plummeted worldwide as uncertainty froze investments and hiring. Retail stores closed their doors, shopping malls emptied, and factories slowed production, unsure of what the future would hold. The fear of job losses and shrinking profits became a daily reality for millions. Nations like Mexico and Chile scrambled to diversify exports, urgently seeking new markets to offset the sudden loss of access to the US market. Government officials worked around the clock, negotiating new trade deals and supporting local industries in their search for stability. Meanwhile, Japan and South Korea sought exemptions to protect vital trade ties, sending high-level delegations to Washington and other capitals. Their economies, deeply integrated with global supply chains, faced enormous risks if tariffs were imposed. The threat of tariffs on BRICS nations risked disrupting supply chains for industries everywhere. Factories in Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa braced for delays and shortages as goods were held up at borders and costs soared. Automakers, electronics firms, and countless others braced for impact, knowing a tariff in one country could trigger economic pain in another. Executives held tense meetings, trying to map out contingency plans as the situation grew more volatile by the day. The United Nations warned of prolonged instability if disputes weren't resolved quickly. International organizations called for urgent dialogue, fearing that a prolonged standoff could push millions into poverty and reverse years of economic progress. Countries urgently re-evaluated alliances and trade strategies, seeking ways to shield themselves from US unpredictability. New partnerships were discussed, and old alliances were tested as leaders searched for solutions. The interconnected global economy now faced a domino effect, with anxiety mounting over a possible worldwide downturn. As trade routes shifted and economic activity slowed, the world watched anxiously, hoping for a resolution before the damage became irreversible. Today's trade disputes threaten the very foundation of the international order built on cooperation and predictable rules. Unilateral tariffs risk a fragmented, protectionist world, jeopardizing both prosperity and diplomatic alliances. India and the EU are racing to secure deals or exemptions before the August 1st deadline, making major concessions to avoid US penalties. The EU's united front is a crucial test of whether economic blocs can withstand US pressure. The outcome will shape global trade governance and the balance of power for years to come. The world now faces a defining moment. Will open trade and international law prevail, or will economic nationalism take hold? Decisions made in the coming weeks will determine whether we move toward shared prosperity or deeper division. Amid global trade turmoil, where uncertainty and shifting alliances dominate headlines, Canada's patient diplomacy stands out as a beacon of stability. While many nations react swiftly to protect their interests, often escalating tensions, Canada has chosen a different path, one marked by careful deliberation and a commitment to dialogue. Even after the US abruptly walked away from crucial talks, Canadian officials refused to be drawn into confrontation. Instead, they called for renewed dialogue, emphasizing the importance of finding common ground and seeking solutions over conflict. This approach reflects a deep belief in the power of negotiation and compromise, even when the odds seem stacked against them. Meanwhile, India and the European Union are also engaged in high-stakes negotiations, offering strategic concessions and leveraging their collective strength to avoid damaging tariffs. These parallel efforts show that Canada is not alone in valuing patient, calculated diplomacy in the face of global challenges. All these efforts highlight the complex choreography of modern diplomacy, where economic interests, political considerations, and geopolitical strategies are tightly intertwined. Every move is carefully weighed, and every word can have far-reaching consequences. Canada's steady, disciplined approach has earned it a reputation as a voice of reason and reliability on the world stage. By consistently prioritizing dialogue and long-term relationships, Canada has become a trusted partner in international negotiations. While other countries may vent frustration or resort to short-term tactics, Ottawa's unwavering focus on long-term stability has not only protected its own interests, but also enhanced its global standing. This commitment to calm, measured action sets Canada apart in turbulent times. The world watches closely as Canada's quiet determination and thoughtful strategy become a model for managing crisis through calm negotiation. Observers and allies alike are taking note of how patience and persistence can yield positive results. In a time of uncertainty, Canada's strategy proves that patience, discipline, and a willingness to listen can be powerful forces in international affairs, reminding us all that sometimes the most effective way forward is through steady, thoughtful negotiation rather than confrontation. The trade war's real impact is felt by businesses and consumers far from the negotiating table. US manufacturers face soaring costs for steel, aluminum, and copper, forcing tough choices, delaying expansion, cutting jobs, or raising prices. For families, tariffs mean higher prices on everything from cars to groceries, shrinking household budgets and dampening consumer spending. The threat of new levies on BRICS goods could disrupt global supply chains, leaving companies uncertain about the future. No sector is insulated. Anxiety spreads as the risk of a broader downturn grows. The burden falls on everyone: factory workers, farmers, and families alike. These human costs highlight the stakes of high-level trade decisions. Leaders must weigh the real-world consequences as they navigate this economic storm. America's aggressive tariffs have strained its closest alliances, forcing partners like Canada, Japan, and the EU to rethink their relationships with the US allies, now balance decades of shared values with the urgent need to defend their own economies. Canada's calm persistence offers a model for engaging the US without escalating conflict. Meanwhile, targeted nations are forging new partnerships to reduce dependence on the American market. Countries like Mexico and Chile are redirecting exports, potentially reshaping global trade patterns. The pressure from Washington is driving new collaborations and conversations among former competitors. As alliances shift, new economic blocs may emerge, fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape. This era could be remembered as the moment global partnerships were redefined by the challenge of US trade policy. With the August 1st deadline looming, the future of global trade hangs in the balance. Nations face tough choices: accept US terms, brace for tariffs, or scramble for last-minute solutions. Despite promises of hundreds of new deals, only a few have materialized, deepening uncertainty. Diplomacy has become a high-stakes game, with leaders trying to decipher US intentions and formulate responses under pressure. The lack of clarity complicates decisions from Brussels to New Delhi, with billions in trade at stake. Some countries push for breakthroughs, others prepare for a world of higher barriers. The actions taken before the deadline will determine if the crisis de-escalates or spirals into prolonged conflict. The world waits as critical decisions are made in the final hours. As the deadline nears, the world faces a pivotal choice: negotiation or confrontation. One path leads to cooperation and shared prosperity, the other to economic nationalism and division. Canada's patient diplomacy has set an example, showing it's possible to defend national interests without abandoning dialogue. The EU, India, and others are also navigating this crossroads, seeking compromise to avoid a global trade war. If talks succeed, the system may be pulled back from the brink. If not, a cycle of retaliation could harm everyone. The US holds the key. Will it build bridges or raise barriers? The world watches, knowing the path chosen now will shape the future of global trade for generations.